Welcome back to the Golden State with Mates. Well, it's not really a post-game live, I suppose you can say. It is after the Thunder and Nuggets played off in Game 7. Not really a great game for neutral fans, that must be said. I woke up bright and early Monday morning looking forward and excited to Game 7, which I think is Game 7s are, I think, the best thing in sport. Just absolutely unbelievable. The excitement for it is off the charts for me. And unfortunately, it did not live up to the hype whatsoever. And the Nuggets had a 26-21 lead after the first quarter. And then after that, the Thunder took control, outscored them by 37 over the remaining three quarters. Alex Caruso, who in an alternate universe probably should have been a Warrior. Golden State, obviously going back to the 2024 trade deadline, offered the Bulls at that time was Moses Moody and multiple first-round picks, I think, for Caruso and maybe Andre Drummond in there as well. So there is a different world in which Alex Caruso is a Golden State Warrior, but alas, instead he's now headed to the Western Conference Finals as a member of the Oklahoma City Thunder, where they'll, of course, take on the team that took out the Warriors in the Minnesota Timberwolves. And, of course, in the East, we've got the Knicks and the Pacers. So it should be two fascinating finals on each side of the bracket. I think the Thunder are going to have too much for the Timberwolves. I think their defense is really going to be an extra problem than what the Timberwolves saw against the Warriors. Now, the Warriors did have a really good defense as well, but I just thought Draymond was that tired and that weary by the end of the playoffs or end of Golden State's playoff run that he just couldn't perform and impact defensively in a way that he usually would. And I just think they have got so many, as in the Thunder, they've got so many great individual defenders and they've got so much depth there with Caruso coming off the bench and whatnot. They can just make so many different moves that I think that is going to ultimately hurt and cause concerns for the Timberwolves. And so I think the Thunder, I think this was their big challenge, getting past Nikola Jokic and the Nuggets, and I expect them to get past the Timberwolves. And then, to me, the Pacers-Knicks is a real flip of the coin. I might take the Pacers. I think I might take the Pacers. I don't know particularly why. I just think that's a genuine 50-50, and it's going to be huge. It's going to be huge either way. We're going to have another new champion and a different champion for like the 7th straight year or whatever it is. So the equality and the parity in the NBA at the moment is obviously huge. I'm going to get into some trade free agency stuff here. I'm going to let you guys kind of run the conversation. There's plenty that's already came out since I did a post-game live for the Warriors Game 5 loss to the Timberwolves a few days ago now. If my eyes look really red, I apologize. Obviously got up first thing this morning to watch the Thunder Nuggets Game 7. Then after that, I decided to go for a run and I chose to put some sunscreen on beforehand, and I sweat like an absolute pig whenever I do physical exercise. And of course, as I'm running along, the sweat's just dripping down, collecting the sunscreen, going into my eyes. And so that is why I have very red eyes now, because I feel like sunscreen's just going through them, trying to wash them out. But anyway, let's get on with it. We'll talk Jonathan Kuminga's future as well. A couple of reports just quickly with him. Sounds like the Warriors will be exploring sign and trade scenarios. Both Anthony Slater, Marcus Thompson, The Athletic have reported that, along with ESPN's Shams Charania. So not overly surprising. I think the good thing from a Warrior perspective is here that JK's form throughout the last 4 games of the playoffs, where obviously he led the team in scoring, was probably easily the biggest positive from it. I think that would go to show you that the Warriors, they're not going to let JK walk here for nothing, right? They're not just going to see an offer sheet from the Brooklyn Nets or whatever and say, we're going to pass that up and you can walk to the team of your choosing, right? They are going to want something fairly substantial for Jonathan Kuminga, I think. Otherwise, he will just come back. Now, I still think there's probably a pathway here where they do get something pretty substantial in return. It may not be the absolute quality value that we want, I suppose, in return for a player of JK's talent. But I do think there is a way here in which a sign and trade scenario does become the outcome here, rather than Kuminga either coming back or walking. I think the last option, I think the complete non-option is him just walking for nothing. I don't think that will happen. So it's really, do the Warriors find something of value to get a sign and trade done, or do they just bring him back? But there's so much to still play out here over the next few weeks. Let's start with a few of your comments here, guys. Streetcar says, just want to say a JK for Cam Johnson trade is one that we will regret. Cam Johnson's numbers are inflated by playing on the Nets. I don't believe he's a third option on a contender type or on a contender type team. All right, I'm just going to look at Cam Johnson's numbers here. Was he like 20 points a game, basically? I agree. Like, I think he wouldn't get as many shots on the Warriors as he would the Brooklyn Nets. But I think it's not as if it's not going to be a case of necessarily like if you look at the Knicks giving up 5 first-round picks for Mikal Bridges and they're going to give him a big extension and stuff like that. It's not a case of that. It's not like you're going all in for a player whose numbers might have been inflated. Yes, Kuminga is a talented player, but Cam Johnson's on a good contract. And even if he's averaging 18.8 points per game this season, 39% from three-point range, it's really the three-point shooting that you just want to stay at that number, like 39%, 6 or 7 attempts per game. I think that's what you want. Now, some of the more shot creation off the dribble stuff, you're not going to see in a Warrior ecosystem. But I think even if those points kind of decrease to 14, 15 points a game, I think that is probably and the 3-point shooting remains around that elite, 39, 40% on higher volume. That's, I think, pretty good. And I think that's probably all the Warriors would want. The best thing about Golden State right now, and why I think I feel a little bit more optimistic about this offseason compared to last, is that they've already got their second star in place, right? They've already got Jimmy Butler. Okay, this time last year, we were talking about, okay, can they find a second guy for Steph? Can they get Paul George? Can they get Larry Markin and all these different guys? Well, they've got that now with Jimmy Butler, okay? So can they find a third guy? That's, to me, can they find a third guy that fits into what they do? And to me, Kuminga could be that guy. Like, Kuminga showed in the last 4 games of the playoffs, he's an incredibly talented scorer. He can be the third guy. But can he be the third guy on the Warriors? I don't think so. To me, at this point of his career, he's more thinking about, okay, can I be the 1 or 2 on a bad team or a team that's maybe fighting to be in the play-in tournament or anything like that? I don't think he's too interested in being the third guy and doing a lot more of the role player stuff in terms of rebounding, defense, and all that stuff. We've seen that. That's basically what it is. Like, he was just not well equipped to do the role player stuff, which found himself out of the rotation. Suddenly, Steph gets injured, of course. JK, Steve has no option but to bring back one of his most talented scorers. And JK, he was basically the first option ahead of Jimmy almost, right? Because Jimmy was, struggling a little bit. At the very least, he was the second option. And we saw him thrive in that. He did. He averaged over 20 points a game over the last 4. Anyone that can go for 30 in a playoff game, right? High stakes playoff game, game 3, it's 1-1. Like, that's a good, talented basketball player. Now, whether Jonathan Kuminga can be the third guy behind Steph and Jimmy, I think there's real concerns on that for a number of factors, right? I think the efficiency and the ability to do all the other little stuff, if he's not going to get that opportunity to be the first or second guy, then the other things that he doesn't bring to the table all of a sudden become a lot more magnified. And the lack of shooting specifically is the biggest problem, because you've got him, you've got Draymond, those just overlap. Jimmy doesn't really shoot the 3. We don't know what's going on with the center position at the moment. That's something I'm sure we'll talk about here. But there's too many. It's just such a tough fit for him. If you get a guy like Cam Johnson, who might put up the same points per game, right? But just given that spacing, given the 3-point shooting, that's going to make life easier for Steph. That's going to make life easier for Jimmy. It's just a much more cleaner fit for the Warriors than what Jonathan Kuminga could be. Okay? So if I was presented that option and the Nets said, we'll take Jonathan Kuminga and give you Cam Johnson, it was a 1-for-1, right? I'd probably do that deal. I probably would. I'd feel a bit difficult about it because there's a good chance that JK goes out and puts up way bigger numbers than Cam Johnson does, right? But at the end of the day, it's a team game. It's about winning a championship. And I think the Warriors, with Steph and Jimmy, I think would have a better chance of winning the championship with Cam Johnson as their third guy than they would Jonathan Kuminga. Again, just a much cleaner fit. Thai basketball fans says, and the Bulls went for Giddey. Why would they do that? That's in response to the Caruso thing. Well, the issue for Chicago now is they're going to have to pay Giddey $25-30 million a year, which I'm obviously Australian. I'm a big fan of Josh. My issue with him, and why this has always been my issue with him, is that he's a ball dominant guy. He needs the ball in his hands to be effective. And the reason OKC traded him is because, well, you're not going to take the ball out of Shea's hands, and you're not going to take the ball out of Jalen Williams' hands to give the ball to Josh Giddey. You're not going to do that. And therefore, how effective can he be? He just wasn't, right? He just wasn't part of their best lineups in the playoffs last year, because you're asking him to be an off-ball catch and shoot threat, right? Now, the issue now with Chicago is you're going to pay $25-30 million for him. And Josh Giddey, as the lead ball handler, a real primary decision maker in your offense, maybe in the East, that gets you to the play-in tournament, right? It did this year. It got you to the play-in tournament. But it's not really getting you any further. And that's my problem with Josh, is a lot of Australian fans will only look at the box score numbers and say, oh, Josh is putting up triple doubles, looking great, hitting half court shots against the Lakers. Fantastic. That's fine. He's getting his numbers. He's playing well. But where does that get the Bulls from a long-term standpoint? I don't know, right? Because they need, I think Josh Giddey is maybe your third best offensive player, right? But can he be it's like Kuminga. It's like Josh Giddey's almost like Kuminga, where he's best with the ball in his hands, making plays himself. But as soon as you get him off the ball, he's far less effective, right? And so we're going to see Jonathan Kuminga probably go to a team like Chicago. He's not going to go to Chicago, but a team like Chicago that are either in the play-in tournament or down the bottom of the conference, wherever it may be, West, East, whatever. And he's probably going to put up big numbers, right? He's going to probably have a heap of double-doubles. He's going to look great. But where does that actually lead in terms of winning? I don't know. And now the Bulls are stuck with having to pay Josh Giddey big money and rightly so, because he would be like, well, hang on, look at the numbers I've put up. Look at what I've done for you this season, particularly over the second half, right? So he deserves that money, but where does it actually get the team in the long term? And that's my biggest issue with Josh as a basketball player, is he needs the ball in his hands to be effective, right? He needs to be a primary option. I just don't think, no one's out here thinking that Josh Giddey can be the best player on a championship team. I don't think there's many people that think Josh Giddey could be the best player on a playoff team, right? So that's, I think, the biggest concern. I'm happy to be proven wrong on that, but even with all the numbers and great stuff he did for the Bulls this season, that's my problem. And I just think if you're Chicago, if you're a fan of the Bulls, you'd probably prefer them to have got Moses Moody, who's, who could get under contract for, what the Warriors now have, 3 years, 37.5, and gotten the picks, right, to try and get a full rebuild rather than get a guy who's actually going to help you win games, but not to the level that it's anywhere above the play-in tournament. So I think if you're Chicago looking back on that, as good as Giddey was, I think I'd actually prefer, for the long-term future of the franchise, to have Moody on a good team-friendly deal and multiple first-round picks from the Warriors at a time perhaps later down the track where who knows what's happening with Steph, who knows what's happening with Draymond, right? And they could be bad at that point. You could get a top 10 pick out of it. So who knows? Thai basketball fan says the Warriors have potential to play good defense, but when there's no offense, it hurts the defense, both mentally and tech. Both mentally and physically. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, I know. I agree with that. Yeah, sometimes your best form of defense is your offense, like putting the ball in the basket, right? And sometimes I think you saw that with the Nuggets today. Like, how many times? I think I saw someone tweet out, like, these rebounds like live ball turnovers, where the Nuggets are just missing shots or whatever, and there's a long rebound, and the Thunder get out, and all of a sudden they're down the other end in the space of 3 seconds, like a two-on-one, 4 at the basket. Like, so yeah, sometimes your best, and I mean, that's the same in all levels of basketball. I play Tuesday night social league, and our best defense is when we can get set up in the half court, obviously play zone, and no one can hit jump shots and whatever else. Our only source of offense is when we get stops and get out in transition. And then again, you make a bucket, you can get back into your half court defense. So, basketball and all sport in general, like your offense and your defense, like it just flows together, and it's just a natural part of the game, I suppose. Logan says, Peter, what would realistic trade for Giannis look like? Obviously, future first-round picks and Jimmy in there, I would think. All right. So the Giannis thing, Chris Haynes reported yesterday that he is going to be meeting with the Milwaukee Bucks in the next few days here to decide, or not decide, but talk about the future of the team and his future, obviously. The issue, I think, with Milwaukee and trying to, get Giannis to stay, I suppose, is that I just don't know how or what they do to try and actually rebuild this team. So Dame's going to be out for a year with that Achilles, absolutely terrible. But that's just the reality of what he's facing and what the Bucks are facing there. Kuzma looks like an absolute disaster. Lopez is a free agent, old anyway. So even if you did bring him back, like, what are you doing? Bobby Portis, they don't have many picks. Like, I just don't see the avenue here for them to go and get a real difference-making piece where Giannis can look at this and think, okay, well, at least we've got that new acquisition that could provide a difference for us. I just don't really see it, right? And so if I'm Giannis, I would have real concerns. And it's why I think there is a chance here that he is traded this offseason. So we'll wait and see for that. But in terms of a Warrior aspect, it's already been mentioned. I know Brian Windhorst mentioned it on Get Up, I think, on Thursday or Friday or something. The Warriors are not going to win a bidding war, right? They are not going to win a bidding war for Giannis Antetokounmpo, right? Teams like the Thunder, the Spurs, the Rockets, maybe a couple of teams still in the, like the Nets, whatever else, they can outbid the Warriors with young players and a bunch of more future first-round picks, right? However, the Warriors, that's not to say their chances for Giannis are completely dead and buried, I don't think. They do have enough to at least get in the conversation. I think like they do have a realistic offer that I think is better than probably what half or maybe even 20 of the teams could provide, right? Like there's some teams that just can't get Giannis, right? Just could not possibly get Giannis. The Warriors are not in that group. They could. However, I think it would take Giannis really almost demanding his way to the Bay to play with Steph. It would take that. It would take Giannis saying, I don't want to go anywhere else but the Warriors. I've got 2 years left on my contract. You know what? If you trade for me, I'm just going to go to the Warriors in 2 years anyway. The issue with that is, again, there's still 2 years. So a team would still be like, no, we're just going to trade for you anyway. And we'll get 2 years, like probably still get 2 really good years out of you. We'll try and change your mind. How could you go to the Warriors anyway? At the end of that, like, are the Warriors going to have salary cap space somehow in a couple of years? I don't know. But I think that's probably the only way the Warriors can really get Giannis is if he really demands to go to the Warriors and the Warriors only, which I don't think is going to happen. So it's still very unrealistic. However, if you're talking about the trade, I think Jimmy's probably the cleanest in terms of the salary matching, and then you'd throw in Pods, and you'd throw in, I don't know what happens with Kuminga in terms of can that be a sign and trade scenario. That would be difficult if you're doing Jimmy because all of a sudden you're adding even more salary to the mix in terms of going to Milwaukee. Obviously, you'd throw in all the future first round picks, all the pick swaps and stuff like that. Basically, you'd say to Milwaukee, well, what do you want? What do you want here? Like, I'd let them start the conversation, okay, and say, everyone but Steph is on the table. You can't mention Steph, but everyone else. And that's what the Warriors would be like. It's like, okay, if we can get Giannis, it's almost like anyone's available. Anyone and anything in terms of the picks is available, right? And it's almost a case of what do you want from a Milwaukee standpoint. The unfortunate thing for the Warriors again is if it is a bidding war, like, unless they're willing to put up Steph, which they're obviously not going to be, like, they can get outbid rather easily, even if they put everyone on the table bar Steph. Okay. So really it's probably Jimmy, Pods, and all the picks, really. Or it's a smaller or it's a combination where you actually try and keep Jimmy and it's Draymond, maybe Kuminga in some kind of sign and trade. Like Moody could be like, you could try and match the salaries with like Draymond, Moody, Buddy Hield, Pods, all the picks in there as well. Then obviously the Warriors have just got the 3 real high-end players with Steph, Jimmy, and Giannis. You're basically going to have very, very little outside of that, and then you just try and work out whatever you can. So they're kind of the 2 things. It's like Draymond plus any salary you can kind of get, or Jimmy, Pods, and the picks, really. And then Moody's probably going to be involved in any big trade, you would think, given his mid-tier salary. Buddy Hield potentially as well. Kuminga's just a really complicated scenario with the sign and trade. It was really interesting. Obviously, I'm sure a lot of you guys would have seen the Valkyries' first home game at Chase Center on Friday when Jonathan Kuminga was sitting courtside next to Joe Lacob, which was not a coincidence, I'm sure. Like that's something that I think Joe Lacob clearly knew what he was doing in that situation. And then Doc Rivers was there as well, and Doc Rivers came up and gave a hug to JK as well. And I know a lot of Warrior fans on Twitter got up and about a little bit, thinking, okay, this is the Kuminga sign and trade to the Bucks as part of a deal for Giannis. But I think that the first step is, okay, let's see what happens as a result of this meeting that Giannis and the Bucks are having middle next week, and that'll give us a better understanding of whether he could actually become available this offseason and whether he does request a trade. And obviously from there, it starts to become a little bit more realistic, albeit, again, the Warriors aren't going to win a bidding war for Giannis. Thai basketball fan says, really don't want to see someone like Brook Lopez or Vucevic slow and old. He's not how you support an old core, and frankly, any core really, especially when they'll be played off the floor. Lopez is interesting to me, but just if he's on like a minimum or even like the mid-level, a taxpayer mid-level exception, if you're getting him for less than $6-7 million, I think he interests me a little bit. In saying that, I'm a little bit like you. I'm not excited by it. I think it just works, schematically again, because you need to figure out your center position. It can't be Draymond, and therefore, if Draymond's still going to start on this team, it has to be a shooting big man. It has to be that new kind of prototypical 3-and-D big man, right? A guy like Brook Lopez, a guy like Miles Turner, a guy like Quentin Post, except Quentin Post doesn't have the D so far in his game, which is fine. He was a 52nd overall pick. It was his rookie year. That's fine. It would have been great to see Quentin Post have a big, a few playoff performances, and you could really then go into next season thinking this guy could actually be our starting center. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Again, I don't think that's anything against him. Rookie, 52nd overall pick. He far exceeded expectations in his first year. So I've got no worries with that, but it does mean the Warriors have to make a decision here. They cannot go in with Draymond. They need to add a big man. Shams has already reported that, what did he say? A defensive playmaking wing, which I'm not even sure who that is or what that could be, and also a center, right? So Shams already reported the Warriors will be looking at a center this offseason, and Brook Lopez is a name Bobby Marks has already brought up, which is quite notable. And I think for Brook, I think he would be seeing here that the timeline on his career is starting to fade a little bit. And I think if the Warriors, they might not necessarily be able to give him the biggest financial deal, but at this stage of career, he's made a lot of money. If the Warriors came in and said, we've got the starting center spot for you, like we are coming for you to be the starting center, I don't think there's been many teams around the league that would be promising Brook Lopez the starting center role on a team next season, particularly a team like the Warriors with Steph Curry, Jimmy Butler, Draymond Green, who are still clearly trying to compete, right? So that to me means that Brook Lopez could actually be a reasonably realistic option here for the Warriors. But again, I'm not excited by it. I think defensively, for the way the Warriors try to guard, we saw what they did over the second half of the season after the Butler trade. They went small with Draymond at the 5, and they were the best defense in the league from February 7 onwards, right, to the end of the regular season. Okay. The way they want to defend, I don't think is conducive to a guy like Brook Lopez or a guy like Nikola Vucevic, albeit Lopez has been a great defender, right? He's been a great interior. And it'd just be a case of, all right, Lopez is just an upgrade on Post. Like that is what it would be. And we saw the limitations with Quentin Post in the playoffs. We saw his limitations defensively at times during the regular season, but he was also very helpful, right? He was also very helpful shooting 41% from beyond the arc, right, over the final months of the season. So you'd really just be looking at that and saying, all right, Brook Lopez is just an upgrade on Quentin Post. Okay, he's going to give you a little bit more physicality on the inside with defense and rebound. Okay, while also he's probably a bit of a downgrade in terms of shooting the ball, but he's also like got a little bit of touch around the rim in a way that QP doesn't have right now in terms of being able to capitalize on guys jumping out and doing some work on the interior. Because, I mean, you saw what Quinton, I think, shot 33% from the floor in the playoffs, which for a 7-footer is just disgusting. Like 33% from the floor in the playoffs. And I think that just goes to show you his inability to make use of his 7-foot size right now around the basket it's just completely non-existent, and it's not a great look. So that's something for him to work on. And I'm high on QP. I'm looking forward to his second season. I think they should continue developing him and hoping that he can become a legitimate, potentially a starting center in time. But I just don't think for a team that's looking to compete again next season that you can go into next season thinking that Quinton Post is your starting big man. Tyler Basketball fan also says Cam Johnson would be a great addition, but I agree they might need to overpay, which would hurt their ability for more moves while not solving the lack of offensive creation. Well, to me, it's like, what would Brooklyn want more than like Kuminga? Like, if Brooklyn come to you and say, well, we want Kuminga and a first for Cam Johnson, then I get a little bit hesitant, right? If they come and ask for Kuminga and Moody, maybe I get a little bit hesitant, right? I think if it was a straight swap, then yeah, sure. But how many straight swaps do you see these days that don't involve picks or other players or whatever else? You just don't see many of those. Obviously, we saw the Giddey Caruso one last offseason that we've already talked about, but it is pretty rare. And I think if Brooklyn, they'd probably ask for more, knowing that the Warriors could be in a situation where Brooklyn have the cap space where they could just outright sign Kuminga and put the Warriors under pressure anyway. So I don't know. We'll wait and see on that. FTW Clan asks, how would you feel about picking up Sabonis, Demantis? Very talented player. You would think works within the Warrior system with his passing and screen setting and stuff like that. Great rebounder. My issue is he's another guy who doesn't space the floor. And again, I don't know what's your trade is my question, because I think if Draymond was involved in the trade and you flip Draymond and stuff for Sabonis, then yeah, sure. And I suppose that's how it would have to be. But if you're talking like a Kuminga sign and trade and somehow you end up with Sabonis, which I'm not even sure that's logically, available or would be even possible. But I think if you had Draymond and Sabonis, obviously there's history there between those two guys already. But if you had those two guys in the front court, again, there's just way, way too little spacing. And I think that's the biggest concern. So if you could flip Draymond into Sabonis, then maybe I think about it. But alongside Draymond, I don't think I could do it. Amar Singh says Kuminga should go to a team with a lot of shooting, or the Warriors should just add a lot of shooting. But the issue is, like, again, to add that shooting, to get Kuminga around a bunch of great shooters, like, you're going to have to, but you'd have to get rid of Draymond. And that's why I said after the post-game live earlier in the week, I don't think Draymond and Kuminga can be on the roster going into next season. I just don't think both of those guys can be. One of them, sure, and I think most likely it's going to be Kuminga gone. But again, maybe there's a world in which it's actually Draymond instead, right? And you keep hold of Kuminga and you turn Draymond into a shooting big man of sorts, right? Or just something else that adds more shooting and gives Kuminga more runway in terms of when he's going to the rim and whatnot. I think you just, the idea of going into next season with Butler, Kuminga, and Green all on big money, that just doesn't work. That just doesn't fit. Okay. And so you can really only have a maximum of two of those guys. And if you have two of those guys, you've really got to maximize your shooting around that. Right. Thai basketball fans agree about Giddey. The Bulls just refused to reset. Multiple teams would have given them a first rounder or better young talent for Caruso. Yeah. Logan says, unless Giannis picks the Warriors as his next spot, maybe Steph can convince him. Giannis was the only non-Warrior player at Steph's All-Star Weekend party in February. Just putting that out there. It's been reported. Again, I'm not sure that means too much in the grand scheme of things, but maybe it's something. Thai basketball fans says, Draymond and Giannis are both PS with no outside shooting. You're not putting either at the 3, are you? So it's Draymond off the bench. Draymond complicates everything. He really does. Like, unfortunately, his limitations offensively does put the Warriors in a bind in terms of the kind of lineups they can run. And it's exactly why he was the starting center for the second half of the season, essentially, until Steph went out and they decided to go big with TJD. And then their offense was just horrific, obviously. So I don't know. I don't know if it's time to move on from Draymond. At the very least, I think you've got to have the conversation about him coming off the bench. I do agree. I think if it's Giannis, again, I'm not sure you can have both of those guys. So I don't know. I think if you get, I'm not sure if anyone's going to give up anything of real value for Draymond this offseason. But I think if you could get something and it changed the look of your team a little bit, I think it's worth exploring is what I would say. It's worth exploring. I'm not saying you go out and you actively shop Draymond, but if you're in conversations about a player, I think you could bring Draymond up, and I think certainly you'd be willing to listen to rival executives bringing up Draymond in trade conversations. Bob says they should all out for Giannis now, then trade him after 2 years when Steph retires, so you could still be worth a lot at 32, 33. Yeah, good point. I just their version of all out for Giannis just still cannot match what another team could offer. Let's be honest. Thai basketball fan says, why would Giannis want that? He's 30. He probably wants a better and more long-term situation. El Boogie says, get rid of Draymond. I think it's, as I said before, it's worth the conversation, I think, with him. Thai basketball fan says, they absolutely need a center. I just don't think it has to be a stretch five. If they have enough skill at 1 to 3 or even bench Draymond, they'd benefit a lot from a legit center with the basic skills. I just think the days of having Draymond at the 4 with a guy who does not have any scoring ability beyond the paint is just over. Like, it's just over. Okay, we saw it going back to last season with Draymond and Looney. Just, I'm sorry, Loon, but you had to go out basically because that tandem became unplayable. They went back to TJD in this, they started with TJD. Now they've gone back to TJD in the last 3 games of the playoffs. Doesn't work to me. TJD just does not have enough offensive skill. So to me, it has to be like, I'm just on, it has to be a shooting 5, or at least has to be some guy who can hit a mid-range shot or something consistently. Okay. So who are those options? I don't think there's many that you would necessarily love. Like, again, Lopez or Vucevic, like, they come with their own limitations and concerns on the other end of the floor. I think if he wasn't so injury prone and if he didn't have the scary illness thing in the playoffs, I think Porzingis is a player that has long interested me at the Warriors just with his offensive skill set and his ability to block shots on the other end. He's now making, $30 million. He is an expiring contract, which is helpful, I guess. But he could be gettable given the Celtics' financial situation, definitely. But then how does that work with Boston actually trying to get off money? Like, their ability to actually get off money is going to be difficult, given Brooklyn are like the only team with cap space. Is it something where Kuminga goes to Brooklyn and then Porzingis comes to the Warriors and something else goes to Boston that's far less than the $30 million contract of Kristaps Porzingis? I just think it's too much of a risk to try to get Porzingis when the Warriors are in a position where they need their key guys to play. Okay. They do not have the luck. I think Boston are in the luxurious position of, and for a reason, because they're paying so much, right? They're in a position where they can almost have Porzingis, or they did almost have Porzingis as a luxury, and they didn't necessarily need him to win. Now, of course, he gets ill, has no impact, and they lose in the playoffs. But I think that was more, if Tatum hadn't have gone down, we, might have seen what happened kind of thing in that series. I don't know. But I think to me, Porzingis is more of a luxury than a necessity for Boston. On the Warriors, he would be a necessity. You'd have to get 60 plus games out of him. And I just don't think you can get that. And so if you're the Warriors, you're fighting hard in a very, very tough Western Conference. I'm not sure how you can really afford to have a $30 million guy starting center who only plays 40 to 45 games every year, right? And then has issues in the playoffs as well. I just don't know. Other options, Miles Turner, you'd think is going back to Indiana. He would be the perfect option, I think, for the Warriors. But again, I can't see him leaving Indiana, particularly after they've now got to the conference finals. Is there anyone else? Anyone else we like? I don't know. Let's bring some up if you feel like it. El Boogie says, if the owner likes JK so much, why didn't he make Kerr play him? Kerr has favorites, and it's not fair for players' development. I think there was probably a lot of pressure from higher up on Steve to play Kuminga more. I think we saw that maybe at the start of the season for the first, 2 games, was it, where the Warriors went to this really huge lineup where Kuminga was at the 3, Wiggins was at the 2, Draymond at the 4, TJD at the 5. And I think that was probably not what Steve wanted to do. But I think he does feel some element of pressure from Joe Lacob, who is obviously a huge Kuminga fan. At the end of the day, when you say, why didn't he make Kerr play him? If I'm Steve, I'm not taking rotation coaching advice from the owner. I'm just not. And so the owner can put pressure on me to do that, but it doesn't. I don't think Steve, I think his stature at the franchise, his place as a 4-time champion, his overall standing in the game, he is more than sturdy enough to stand his ground and say, hey, you can put pressure on me to play Jonathan Kuminga. You might love him, but that doesn't mean I'm going to play him. Okay. You are not going to force me. You are not going to let my decisions be impacted by what you think, kind of thing. Now, a young coach, that might be different. If Steve Kerr was sacked tomorrow and a 30-year-old, not 30-year-old, but 40-year-old first-time head coach came in and Joe Lacob said, we've got Jonathan Kuminga, you need to play him, then that coach would probably play Jonathan Kuminga 30 minutes a game. Okay? But I think Steve Kerr is not going to have his decisions dictated to by Joe Lacob, which is absolutely right, because at the end of the day, Steve Kerr is employed to be the head coach to make rotation decisions, right? That is his job. Okay? That's not the job of the owner. Okay, whether rightly or wrongly, we can say that Kerr has butchered Kuminga's development, maybe Moody's too as well. Like, you can make those arguments, but I don't think I don't think we should be thinking that he should have been, I suppose, forced by Joe Lacob to play those guys. Ty Basketball Fan says, is Lopez an upgrade? I like to think QP can take advantage of this offseason and play much better when it's not sporadic or playoff minutes. Yeah, good. It's a good point. Like, is there actually much of a difference between the two? I still think there probably is. And you could almost have both, right? And say, well, if Post actually comes into training camp and outplays Lopez, then sure, yeah. But I think it's the idea of putting faith in QP without a backup plan. Or your backup plan's like, you re-sign Looney to a minimum deal or something. Like, you've got to try and give yourself enough options where you then give the role to whoever the best candidate is. And right now, unfortunately, I think the Warriors have 3 centers who are kind of all rotation players. Like, TJD can be helpful, Loon can be helpful, Post can be helpful, but I don't think any of them at this point are guaranteed we're looking to win a championship and this is our starting center. Okay? That's just not it. Right. So you got to give yourself, I think, with Lopez, it gives you a veteran player in contrast to Post, and it gives you another option as a stretch big. And also, like, I think he could be a great developmental presence for Quentin Post. Now, part of you might say, oh, well, he just ate up his minutes, and therefore QP, like Kuminga, like Moody or whatever, would get more limited minutes and his development would stagnate and whatever else. I don't necessarily think so. I think there's a place for both of them. What happens then to Jackson Davis? What happens to Looney? I don't know. We'll wait and see. But I think Lopez at this point is still an upgrade, I think. Right. But I can understand the argument. Ty Basketball Fan says, Brooklyn said before they want 2 firsts for Johnson. Maybe they'll lower the price, but what do they have to lose? They can just hold on to him. They have the leverage. Yep. If Dre's gone, we still have 2 players in JK and Jimmy who are both 3s. Don't want either at 4 defensively or at 2 offensively. I think, okay, so I think you could have both of those guys out there so long as your other 2 guys are decent shooters and one of them is a decent rebounding interior presence, right? In terms of the center spot. It's a lot to ask. Don't get me wrong. But these are the kind of complicated discussions the Warriors are going to have in terms of their lineups and whatnot heading into next season. Logan says, Peter, how long realistically do you think Steph can play at a high level, not MVP level, but high? Well, I think we have this discussion every year, like for the past couple of years, and he continues to defy Father Time. And I think you look at, what LeBron's still being able to play at a higher level. The issue for me with him and Jimmy, I still believe in them as playoff performers. I still believe in them as high stakes. Everything's on the line, being able to perform like, in Steph's case, a top 10 player in the league. In Jimmy's case, a top 15, top 20 player in the league. The problem is in the tough Western Conference next season, which is only going to get harder, right? How do you manage those guys so they don't have to carry a huge burden, right? How do you do it so those guys, Steph played 70 games this season, right? Those guys, Draymond, they played the last 3 months of the season as if it was the playoffs, right? From the time Jimmy arrived, the Warriors had to get on the horse and say, all right, let's go. Okay, we're 11th in the West. We're not even going to make the play-in tournament if we keep mucking around. Okay, and that, I think, ultimately probably in some aspects caused Steph's hamstring injury, right? I think the load that he took over the final few months of the season is just not sustainable. So to me, for the Warriors, I was talking about a third option before. How do you get a third option who at times can potentially win you a game as the first or second option when Steph is sitting or when Jimmy's sitting or both of those guys, right? And so to me, that's why you can make the argument they should keep Kuminga for that. What did we see against the Rockets, right? Remember that home game against the Rockets? Was it in December, I think, when Steph and Draymond were both out and Kuminga just took over, had 30 or something, 33, won the game. I think Wiggins might have had 20 or something and won the game. Okay, that's the argument to keep Kuminga. But again, when Steph and Jimmy are available and Draymond's available, that's just not necessarily a clean fit. So can you have a third guy who can take over for you when those guys are out, but is also a perfect fit with those guys? I don't know who that is. An option that I'm not sure if you guys brought up into the comments or not, Kobe White is an interesting one for me. I know Slater mentioned it on the Warriors Plus Minus podcast that, would Chicago do Moses Moody in a first for Kobe White? That intrigues me because Kobe White to me is a guy now. Is he a perfect fit, right, alongside Steph and Jimmy? Maybe not because, again, you run into size issues. And I think, that's an extra guard you're adding to Brandon Podziemski, Buddy Hield, and Steph. And all of a sudden you've got 4 guards who probably all deserve, 20 plus minutes or whatever else. How does that work out? I don't know. I think there's some concerns. But his sheer shooting ability, I think, would make him like a cleaner fit as like a third option than Kuminga kind of thing. And so, well, maybe you could have both of them. Maybe you could have Kobe White and Kuminga. I don't know. But I think Kobe White's intriguing because I like him as an option who is young, is going to play a lot of games for you. He's going to, he's a 20-point per game guy. I think he would work just with his, elite shooting ability, I think the Warriors also just need guys who can dribble the ball and play make. Kobe White can do that for you. Okay. I think he works, and he would also, is it that, unforeseeable to see Steph, Jimmy resting a night and, Kobe White going for 35 and winning the Warriors a game? I think that's possible. So he's a player that really interests me just based on his contract, especially given his, it's $12 million or whatever. You'd have to pay him big time next offseason, sure. But, at this point, the Warriors around Steph, Jimmy, and Draymond, they're really just taking it a year at a time, aren't they? Or at least they've got this 2-year window, right? So Kobe White's a player that certainly interests me from a Warrior standpoint. Wilker says Golden State won't sign anyone significant. They'll do low-level signings, sign second-round talent, and more G Leaguers. Let's hope it's a little bit more interesting than that. And at least we've got some reports from Sham saying they'll be aggressive. Lucky Jelly says Golden State needs to get rid of Draymond. I'm still mad at him for KD and Poole leaving and getting punched because Draymond can't control his anger. Tire basketball fan says Looney and TJD are undersized and can't even finish in the paint or shoot free throws. Spacing is an issue, but a center with size, defense, and finishing is something we haven't seen in a long time. Yep, fair. Solomon Tech says, if Boston blows it up, get either Derek White, unlikely, or Drew Holiday. I just don't like Drew at his age on his contract now. That's a lot of money. I'm sorry. And I love Drew Holiday, absolutely. But offensively, I mean, you could say, okay, well, he hasn't been asked to produce offensively in Boston because of their array of options. I get it. But I don't think he's that guy offensively anymore that the Warriors probably need. Derek White is a lot more interesting because he's far younger, and at this point, he's probably just a better player. Again, you say it's unlikely, and I think that's probably the case, and the Warriors will probably have to give up a fair bit to get Derek White. And again, it's kind of not what the Warriors need. Like, they want to add size and shooting. Derek White certainly adds shooting, and I suppose he adds defense. So really, what does size matter? As long as you're bringing the defensive element, that's fine. So I think he'd be a great fit, but I think it's unlikely. Lucky Jelly says, I do really like Porzingis. The Celtics might be able to get him for a bargain since he was bad in the playoffs. The Warriors, I'm assuming you mean there. Yeah, I'm a Porzingis guy when he's up and running, right, and looking healthy. But unfortunately, that's 50% of the time, and then the other 50% he's on the sidelines. And again, I just don't think the Warriors can afford to have a $30 million player who doesn't play, who plays half the games. I just don't think they can afford that. So they take the risk in saying, okay, well, we can get Porzingis for a Kuminga sign and trade, and maybe Moody or whatever else. Can we do that and just take a gamble in his health? The issue is you've basically got a full career here, where it would suggest that you can't really take the gamble on his health when you're a team like the Warriors, who kind of again need their key guys to be playing 60 plus games. Bob says Gafford, interesting option. Obviously Dallas have got kind of a surplus of big men there with him, AD, and Lively. So yeah, Gafford is an option. Nick Jones says, get rid of Post. Dude's trash. That's a bit rough what else did you expect from a 52nd overall pick in his rookie year? Now, granted, he's 25 years old. Okay, so he is a little bit further developed than what a rookie generally would be. However, again, your first year of professional basketball, I think he far exceeded expectations. It's going to be interesting to see how his offseason comes about. He's really obviously got to work on his defense, rebounding, his ability to actually, because you saw once teams in the regular season figured him out and said, okay, well, he will actually knock down threes at a higher level. Once they start closing out to him, I actually don't mind his ability to put the ball on the floor. But once he puts the ball on the floor, it's like, okay, what are you actually doing? I actually feel comfortable with him dribbling, but are you going to the rim? Are you making that next kick out pass? Okay. And I thought at times sometimes he would take it to the rim and he just didn't have the finishing. Now, I think he showed some elements of touch around the rim. It's more so the physicality to me, where he doesn't quite get himself in position where he gets those kind of more uncontested. He puts himself in positions where shots can be easily blocked or at least heavily contested, and it's generally a brick, right? So I don't know, big off season for him, but I'm certainly giving him more opportunity. Vivi the Valkyrie says Jabari Smith Jr., by the way, have a 3-team trade to get KD to Houston. That's a player that I would be certainly interested in, because the Warriors they're always going to want to default to Draymond as their small ball option in clutch situations, in big situations. I think Jabari Smith Jr. would be really interesting because he's not a center by any means, but he's 6'10", 6'11". He's a high, I wouldn't say he's an elite three-point shooter because the numbers wouldn't suggest that, but he's going to take a heap of threes, right? He's a former number 3 overall pick, and I think given the array of talent that Houston have there, he's probably been hidden a little bit. And I do think there's probably some elements to Jabari Smith that probably haven't been unearthed yet. And I think there's another level that he can get to here. So to me, as a gamble on a top prospect, on a high upside piece who also naturally with his game you'd think would fit into the Warrior, like shooting threes and playing defense, right? That's what the Warriors kind of need. Okay. They want size. They want shooting. That's Jabari Smith Jr. So to me, that's an interesting name. That is certainly an interesting name that I'd be exploring if there was a way to make that happen. But again, like, yes, his value might not be what it was as a number 3 overall pick, but it's still take a fair bit. Empire says, can Warriors get Josh Giddey or Kobe White? Well, they're not going to get Giddey, but Kobe White is definitely, I think, that's a big player to watch to me, because if Chicago finally think, well, there's a few different elements going on. One, do they want to pay, Giddey 30 plus million and then turn around and pay White 30 plus million next season? Like, are they going to want to do that? $60 million for a backcourt that is, like, they're nice players, but like, where's that backcourt getting you in the ultimate scheme of things? So there's that. And then I also think, like, they just need to get into full reset. They need to try and blow it up. And it's going to be problematic if they keep Giddey, right? Because Giddey will help you win games. But if they want to try and be worse, it's like, okay, can we just get a downgrade in talent, go from Kobe White to Moses? Moses is still, like, helpful. He's a young piece for you on a team-friendly contract. Maybe you move it again down the line, but you get a pick or two in for that. I could see why Chicago might be interested, and I can see why Slater mentioned it on the podcast. And Kobe White to me is very interesting. Logan says, what would Miami want for Bam? Probably a lot. Yeah, you would think. I don't think that's realistic. I mean, again, if you could flip Draymond for Bam, and like Draymond and stuff for Bam, that's something you would explore, but I don't think Miami are going for that. Moody in a first for Kobe White sounds good to me, but why would Chicago do that? Well, for the reasons I just laid out, to try and get worse, essentially. To try and get worse, and because they don't necessarily want to be paying Josh Giddey and Kobe White huge money from 2027 onwards. Brody said Jabari Smith. Yep, certainly. What about Trey Murphy? Pelicans, he can shoot, but package would have to be good. Yeah, I mean, they extended him going into his 4th year. I don't like, he's so good. I would love Trey Murphy on the Warriors. He'd be like the ideal third guy behind Steph and Jimmy, but I don't think the Pelicans are going to give him up. Empire says Warriors should go for Bam. Bam's getting a mention. Again, I don't mind that, but him and Draymond, would it be great defensively? Absolutely. Bam just hasn't really accelerated his 3-point shooting in a way that I would have liked, I think, in terms of his development. It's not something you necessarily want to gamble on, I don't think. So it would have to be Draymond for Bam, I think, in that scenario. And then you try and get a shooting 4 of some kind, or you put Bam at the 4 and try and get a shooting 5 and play big, and maybe you could have Bam and Quentin Post starting together. I don't know. The other issue here with all of this is Pods, right? And I just briefly mention him, is that we're talking about different lineups and whatever else, but Pods was a bona fide starter, right, across the course of the last few months of the season. And with his 3-point shooting, it's steady, but it's not elite, right? And I think some of these lineups we're talking about where you need to have elite shooters around, like if you're going to have Draymond and Jimmy, or you're going to have Jimmy and JK, or whatever it is, like we're talking about having elite shooting around those guys. Pods is like a willing shooter, a good shooter, I think, but he's not an elite shooter where teams are going to absolutely close out on him, which is why I think, we saw so much, Buddy Hield, not over Pods, but Buddy over Moses, because Buddy at least has the reputation as an elite shooter, and therefore guys are going to close out to him in a way they don't do to Moses. And I think Pods is in a similar situation to Moses. Now, is Pods a much better player than Moses, a much more valuable player than Moses? Yes, absolutely, because he does so many other things. He can put the ball on the floor, make decisions. I think his rebounding is obviously at a much higher level, right? He does so many different things, often shows up in the plus minus, right? But the Warriors have, I think we saw in these playoffs, too many of these guys who are willing shooters and can shoot, but defenses are still going to be happy with them firing away. Like Minnesota's still happy for Pods to take 7-8 threes, right? Houston's still happy for Moses Moody to take 7-8 threes in the first round series. Quentin Post the same. Okay. The Warriors need to find some elite shooting. It's why Cam Johnson makes sense. It's why I think the Warriors would have a hard time giving up Buddy this offseason. Like, I think that would be probably difficult for them to do unless they're getting an elite shooter back in the other way. So all these lineups and stuff, it's really interesting to think about when you've got that pods spot where he's a good shooter but not an elite shooter. And it's like there is a world in which he comes off the bench next season, I think, Brandon Podziemski, which is kind of a regression, I suppose, to what we saw at the end of this season as with him as a kind of bona fide starter. But it's how this may have to shake out, right? And of course, like he could be on the trade table. Now, I think the Warriors would need a lot. I don't think it would happen unless it's part of a Giannis deal or whatever else. But his kind of future and where he sits in the rotation next season, where he fits in different lineups, I think it's going to be fascinating. Then next is, can we get Gafford? I think we can. The issue for me is still like, so he brings, he's just a super upgrade on Trace Jackson Davis, right? He would be. And so he would be helpful, don't get me wrong. But again, it's one of those things where if you've got Jimmy, Dre, and Gafford, right? Like, you got Steph, obviously, you're going to need another elite shooter. And then if Pods is that fifth guy, that's not necessarily an elite shooter. Like, I just don't think that's enough shooting on the floor in 2025. Right. Which is why I'm still like, I like Gafford as a player, but as a starting center next to Draymond, that doesn't really work for me. Vivi says Precious and Santi Aldama. Precious Achua, you mean? Not having too much impact. Santi Aldama, the numbers would actually suggest he's not a great 3-point shooter, but I just think what does Santi Aldama shoot from three this season? I feel like I saw it at one stage, like early in the season, where he was really struggling. I'm a big Santi Aldama guy, right? Anytime he plays the Warriors, just feels like such a dangerous threat. And in terms of, again, he's 6'11". He's not a great defender by any means, but so he got to 36.8% this season on 5 attempts. I like him, but I'm not sure. I mean, he's a free agent, he's a restricted free agent, so it'll be interesting to see what Memphis do there. Brody says Gary Trent, free agent signing. Possibly, but like, do you have Gary Trent along with Pods, along with Buddy Hield? I don't know. Melton is the other one for me. D'Anthony Melton, if you can bring him back on a minimum, we saw how it worked alongside Steph for 2 games or six games in total, but 2 games as a starter. And to me, that's a player that I would certainly have interest in bringing back. Ty Basketball fan says, if the way these playoffs went is any indication, Dre and Bam can absolutely play together. It's a regular season. It's more worrying spacing-wise, but can still see it working. Yeah. Vivi says, Quentin Grimes. Would have to be, I suppose, a Kuminga sign and trade or something. Like, what's Grimes going to get? 20 or something? I don't know. Vivi says, Pods needs to come off the bench unless the starting lineup completely changes. Empire says Warriors should get Blake Hinton and Seth Maxwell from the G League. I thought they were going to sign Hinton as one of their two-way guys. Like, they ended up going for Taron Armstrong, obviously, and then Jackson Rowe before that. I thought Blake Hinton was a little bit unlucky there and did some great stuff. Had a real hot streak there in, what was it, January, February or whatever for Santa Cruz. Brody says Goga Batadze. Orlando might be the team that you could try and pinch a center from because they have got Batadze, Wendell Carter, and Mo Wagner, who's obviously injured at the moment, but he'll be coming back early-ish next season, you'd imagine. That's 3 guys who are 3 like genuine 20, 25 minute per game guys. Could you just grab one of those? Potentially, I think of the 3, they're not going to give up Wagner when he's injured, and he's obviously Franz's brother. I think Wendell Carter, again, for the shooting, is probably the one I'd be interested in most, but he's also way more expensive. He's, I think, got an extension kicking in here, which is like $18 million. He also shot 24.3% from 3 this season after shooting 37%. Maybe just a blip on the radar, but it's not great either. Batadze, to me, it's almost like the Gafford discussion, where he'd be like an upgrade on Trace, but he doesn't really extend his range at all. So is that too problematic in 2025 with a lack of shooting? Ty Basketball fan says, getting a non-shooting center would have to be along with other moves to improve shooting throughout the roster. Yep. El Boogie says Pods has been a bit arrogant this season. Has not earned a Splash Brother title yet. He actually should not be starting. We need a pure shooting point guard. Yeah. So, I mean, his numbers, like Pods had a horrific start to the season. He had a really bad playoffs, obviously, or for the most part anyway. Had a couple of big games, but otherwise, what did he shoot in the playoffs in the end? Would have been helped out by his last game in Game 5. He shot 32.8%, so not good. Regular season, though, he got to 37.2% on nearly 5 attempts a game, which is pretty decent, particularly after the way he started. So he had a long stretch there where he was over 40%. I don't know. It's a tough one because I think I tend to agree. Like, you need elite shooting, and Pods isn't elite. But again, he does other things. And do you think that just with a heap of work in the offseason, he can ever get to that point? I don't know. Tired basketball fan says Orlando also have Jonathan Isaac. Yep, exactly. Is I guess more of a small ball option, but he's still a great defender and he's 6'11". So yeah, I think he's the player to me. Sorry, not him specifically, Jonathan Isaac, but I think Orlando are the team specifically that you might be able to grab a center from. Then says, I think we just need a few pieces. Getting Giannis seems like blowing up the team. I think Giannis is that good that if you just had Steph, Giannis, and one of Jimmy or Draymond, then you just figure the rest out. You just figure the rest out from there, right? There's enough talent, I think, in the NBA that I think you can figure out the rest of the roster. Maybe like you keep some of the guys like that are on cheap deals, like Guy Santos would stick around, Quentin Post probably stick around, TJD maybe, right? And you'd still be able to get enough, I think. And just having Steph and Giannis, that should almost be enough to get you in title contention, to be honest, right? Vivi says Larry Nance Jr. I've been interested in Nance in the past. To me, he's almost like a slow-mo, and I'd be worried about that. I thought Kyle Anderson was going to be a great fit for the Warriors as this like do-it-all kind of forward option who can handle the ball a bit, shoot a little bit, rebound a little bit. Just didn't really work, right? And I think Larry Nance might be a similar thing where he's like a jack of all trades, master of none. And I think Kyle Anderson was a bit like that, and it didn't work. El Boogie says, thanks for your commentary. It's fair and unbiased. Keep up the good work, mate. Thank you. Appreciate the kind words there. Empire says, can Warriors get Aaron Gordon or Jamal Murray? I don't think so. I think Michael Porter Jr. Michael Porter Jr. is going to be the guy the Nuggets try and move off from. Can they move off from him, though? Given, I know he had a shoulder injury and stuff, but man, that looks rough at the moment. Nick Jones is going on about with top 5 defense with Draymond at the 5. Yeah, as I said before, I think the Warriors will always default to their closing lineups being with Draymond at the 5. He's 6'6" and he's 35 years old. And I just thought we saw in the second round against Minnesota and the playoffs in general, even in the first round series against the Rockets, I think he just grew tired. Like, I just think the load that he had to carry over the second half of the season as being a small ball starting 5 night in, night out, I think that just took a toll on him. And so even if you want to say that, okay, we're going to default to going back to Draymond at the 5 in the playoffs, right? You need something, right, across the course of an 82-game regular season and Steve's already said it. Steve Kerr has already came out and said, I do not want Draymond Green starting at center at, game 1 next season. Okay, so Steve said himself, right? They know it. That's exactly why they're going to be in the market for a center. Then says, I was shocked that Gordon started. He was literally limp. Shocked that he had like nearly double-digit rebounds. It was wild. I thought he was actually, I don't know, I thought he was moving okay, to be honest, for a guy with a grade 2 hamstring strain, which is apparently supposed to be worse than Steph's. Thai basketball fan says, we've seen top-heavy rosters get destroyed the past few years. Steph and Giannis is a greater foundation, but today you need more good starters and a bench to be a serious team. Yeah, but yeah, you've got a point. You do have a point. But Steph and Giannis, have we seen a tandem like that? right? I don't know. Like Steph and Giannis that'd be crazy. Brody says Giannis for Draymond Moody and AJ. AJ Dybanster from Adam Silver. I'm confused. Anyway, what would a Steph and Giannis starting 5 be if they trade Draymond, Pods, and Moody? Would be top heavy like people talking about. So you could have Steph. I would try and, in an ideal world, D'Anthony Melton would get healthy. You'd bring him on a minimum and Melton would start. But if it wasn't Melton, I mean, would Buddy have to start? If Buddy's still there, he might be involved in the trade. You'd still have Butler. So it'd be Steph, Butler, Giannis, the center that you try and find. And if it's not Brook Lopez or it's not someone you acquire via free agency or trade, then maybe it's Post and you just say, okay, we're starting this second year center, but at least he's starting next to Steph Curry, Jimmy Butler, and Giannis Antetokounmpo. You can shoot 40% from 3, which you will need. It's hard to say what the team would look like because things would just change so dramatically and there'd be so much more to do in free agency, right? So it's really hard to say what a lineup would look like. But I think if you said, all right, well, we get Melton on a minimum and we get Brook Lopez on a minimum, could you have Steph, Melton, Butler, Giannis, Lopez, right? I don't know. Logan says they have to go all out and supporting Steph to get this next chip. No excuse that they already wasted the past 3 years. Brady's number 1 pick in 2026. Okay, that's how I don't even look at future draft prospects. Danger Zone says, sorry, I'm just trying to keep up with the conversation here. Jay Talk says Steph and Giannis combo is an automatic contender regardless of who else is on the team. Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think you just figure it out. You just figure it out afterwards. Warriors Hoop says, let's go for Giannis. Empire says, I think they should keep Buddy for next season. I know he had a bad regular season, but he was pretty good in the playoffs. Yeah, I think you need to keep him again. Unless you're getting an elite shooter back, I think or you can get an elite shooter in free agency, and then that makes him a little bit more expendable. I think you probably need to keep him. He doesn't miss games. He's very, very durable. I think in an ideal world, like he's got to come back off the bench. He's not a starter for you next season by any means, but I think as a guy coming off the bench to play 15, 20 minutes, it's probably okay. Honestly, it's going to be ups and downs. There's going to be times where you're really, really frustrated, but I think he's earned some grace based on what he did in Game 7 against the Rockets. Thai basketball fan says, I know Steph is much better than Dame, but he's going to be 38. Everyone thought Dame and Giannis were going to be awesome, but the rest of the team was bad and they didn't fit. I just think there's a different. I think the gap between Steph and Dame is probably. I think it's a lot bigger than what people realize. Honestly, I just do. I think Steph's that good, that great, that there's a bit of it. You've had those arguments as like, okay, if you put Dame on those Warriors teams instead of Steph, with KD and whatnot, and they might have won anyway. But I do think there's a gap between Steph and Dame that people probably don't acknowledge as much as they probably should. All right. Logan says, are you seeing these Celtics trading Jaylen Brown rumors? Well, they've got to trade someone, right? They can't keep up with this financial situation, particularly when, Tatum's going to be out all the next season as well. And that probably puts a dent in their championship hopes for next season. So I would think Porzingis and Holiday are the two. But obviously Brown makes a lot of money, so maybe it's him. But from a Warrior standpoint, I don't know how could you move on from Butler to get Jaylen Brown. I don't know if that's doing much for. I suppose it looks better for you in the long term with Jaylen Brown. Doggy says Nets can sign JK easy. They can, but then the Warriors can just make it known that okay, we'll match whatever you offer. Which I think they will. I think the last thing that's going to happen is JK walking for nothing. Vivi says Peyton Pritchard. It's just another guard. I know he'd be an equivalent. I just think I'd prefer Kobe White to Peyton Pritchard. I think. Although maybe Pritchard's been hidden away a little bit as a 6-man in Boston, but I think Kobe White's still a better player than Peyton Pritchard, and therefore I think I'd prefer him. I'm going to finish it up there, guys. We've been going for nearly 70 minutes. My goodness. Plenty of chatter. I'm going to do more of these moving forward. There's certainly going to be so much more coming out over the next few weeks. I appreciate everyone that jumped on this one. I hope you're all having a good weekend. For those of you where it is still Sunday, it's nearly midday here for me. On Monday, I'll jump off, do a bit of riding, and then I'm going to go play some tennis in a few hours' time. So looking forward to that. Social League basketball on Tuesday as well. I'll let you know how I go there. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, that would be greatly appreciated. Follow me at POC252. That's POK252 on X/Twitter. For anyone that is watching on replay, if you have any questions at all, then leave them down in the comments, and I'll try and get to them on the next one I do, whether that's another live or just a general podcast episode. Alrighty, thank you very much, guys, for commenting, and I'll see you on the next one.